in the quiet recognition that silence, when paired with courage, can speak louder than any cruelty.